So this is Marcy Stamper, and I'm here today with Janice Dickinson. She's going to tell us a bit about her work with Braver Angels. So welcome, Janice.
Hi, Marcy.
So why don't we start with just some of your background in the Methow Valley?
Yeah, so I came here in 1998 with my husband, Pete, and two small children. We were brought here by some retiring U.S. ski team athletes because my husband had been working for the U.S. ski team in Park City, Utah. And we started a physical therapy clinic and did that and sold it a few years ago. And I'm very grateful to have come to this amazing place.
We're going to be talking about your work with Braver Angels. Can you tell us a little bit about the organization?
Yeah, Braver Angels started about 5 years ago, and it's an organization working to bridge the political divide in our country. The name comes from an Abraham Lincoln quote, touched by better angels of our nature, and the name has been changed now to Braver Angels. It seems more fitting. The organization started in 2016 after the Clinton and Trump presidential election, and it was started by two men who were really concerned about the super high level of polarization in our country. And one of the men lived in a small town in Ohio, and it was literally ripping his town apart because it was a community of sort of half people who were Democrats and half were Republicans, or red and blue, as we call it in Braver Angels. This man called a friend of his in New York and said, what if we were to get some people together and just talk about this and see if we can work through it? And they found a friend of theirs who was a high-level marriage counselor in Minnesota, a man named Bill Doherty, and invited him to come and spend a weekend. And they rallied 10 Clinton supporters and 10 Trump supporters, got them together for a weekend of just sharing their values and listening to each other. And at the end of the weekend, they were friends, and they made huge progress. And the word of that got out, and it was there was a special program on NPR about it, and they were asked to come to all different places around the country. So what they did is they started a bus tour, and they went to many communities, and they taught this workshop, which they then called the Red Blue Workshop. And it was so impactful in these communities that an organization was born out of that. And it has continued on. Probably one of the benefits of COVID for Braver Angels was that all the workshops that they had been doing in person could now go on Zoom. And they were able to develop that Red Blue workshop as well as several others into a really great Zoom format. And then 100 people could take a workshop from all over the country at the same time. So that was a huge change, for their ability to bring their message and their work to the country.
So how long have you been involved with the group?
I started last year after the second presidential election that was very contentious, because I personally was quite horrified at what I saw in our country and inside myself as well. I think the polarization is very extreme, and I think it threatens our democracy. And so for me, it was a chance to do something with that energy rather than just feel bad and complain. I like being part of a solution more than a problem. So for me, Braver Angels was a huge opportunity. I listened to a podcast one day right after the election with Bill Doherty, who is the man who created the workshops. And it was about the original Red Blue workshop in Ohio. And after I listened to that podcast for an hour, I was hooked. And then the next day, I saw an article about Braver Angels in one of the articles I was reading online. So I thought, okay, I need to dive in. I took a couple of workshops right away and could already feel some changes inside myself. So I knew this was good stuff. So I thought, okay, I'm going to volunteer now. And so that's what I've been doing for the last year.
So was that podcast the first time you even heard of the group?
Yeah, I had no idea they even existed. And I think a lot of the members of Braver Angels have come in through those types of podcasts. People say they didn't know it existed and then heard about it in a podcast, or I guess in an article. And then when you go to their website, braverangels.org, there's just an amazing number of things to choose from that you can participate in. So it makes it easy for different types of folks to begin to work on their own polarization within themselves and in their communities.
So can you talk a little more about some of the things that you were experiencing in yourself and noticing in the community or in the country at large that, drew you to this or made you sort of want to find a group like this to work with?
Yeah, I think what Braver Angels did for me is it made me familiar with what political polarization is. And it goes beyond just disagreement. It goes into othering, we call it othering in quotes, other people, seeing them as different. If they differ politically from us, seeing them as alien. And having a dislike, an aversion for those people, and then a distrust for them as people. And then it goes into moralizing or seeing them as bad people. And when you think about it, this applies to half of the country. 70 million people voted for each party in the last presidential election. So I guess I became aware that within myself, I was beginning to view my neighbors, some family members, some friends as being others. And actually, there was a poll done. The Pew Research Foundation does lots of polls ongoing. And starting in 1960, they've been asking Americans whether they would be uncomfortable with their child marrying someone from the other side. And back in 1960, that was 5% of Americans, and now it's 40%. So I'm not off base in feeling that change within the country and within myself. And I think it's a scary thing. Because we're becoming more and more wanting to see people as different than us, so much so that we can not like them. And then that leads eventually to worse things like violence.
So Janice, this poll you mentioned about people who were uncomfortable with their children marrying someone from the, quote, other side, did they also ask about whether people would be comfortable or could see themselves in a relationship with someone from the other side?
No, they just ask about, they have these questions that are sort of indicators of types of polarization, and that's one of them. But interestingly enough, they did ask them if they would be comfortable with their child marrying someone from another race, and that has done the exact opposite. In 1960, that was 40% said they'd be uncomfortable, and now only 5%. So that shows you the change in how people are viewing the political divide as the greatest divide now between people in the United States. And actually, it's the greatest divide it's been since the Civil War.
And that just comes from research or polling?
Right, yeah.
Maybe you could talk a bit about some of what you were experiencing, either here in this community or with friends or family?
Probably the hardest one for me was my father. I need to help him because he has dementia and he's 88. But whenever I would go visit him, our conversations, not even about politics, and I think that's interesting, is politics doesn't even have to come up. Because in your mind, you're thinking this person is other than you. So any topic can cause a reaction and cause a conversation to go down the wrong direction. And that's what was happening with my father.
I mean, it sounds like you were very introspective and noticed some of these things going on in yourself. But did you find that people you were dealing with, whether it was your father or others in the community, appeared to also be bringing preconceived notions and maybe a lack of willingness to be open-minded or compromise that affected your interactions?
Absolutely. And I think what I have learned from Braver Angels is that how I feel inside affects how the other person feels. Because if I come into a conversation thinking there's something wrong with the other person, they feel that. And if I'm also plotting how I'm going to change their mind, they feel that. So what Braver Angels has taught me is to come into conversations with an open heart and an open mind and with curiosity for how the other person is feeling and how they got to that. So for instance, with my father, I changed. He didn't change. But because I changed, our relationship has changed dramatically. And ironically, we really haven't had a single political conversation. But I don't walk into his house now and feel bad right away inside myself. And so the way I initiate the conversation, then he doesn't feel bad and he doesn't have to get defensive, and vice versa.
And you've found these changes just manifest themselves in the way you relate to people. You're not necessarily telling them about your work with Braver Angels or...
No.
Huh.
I do tell people a lot, and my husband tells people even more than me. He loves to tell people, if we're in a conversation at the dinner table with another family and they bring up something, he'll tell them about my work. But I don't hardly ever mention it. But I feel it, the change that's happened inside myself, and I can tell it's impacted some of the people around me, particularly my husband. He would tell you that he's looking at things differently because I've changed.
Can you provide some details about what you learned from that podcast and your other research into Braver Angels, and how do they go about making or helping people make these changes, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what they're really good at is teaching workshops online and in person when possible. And that's because this founder, Bill Doherty, is a professor of marriage counseling at the University of Minnesota, specializing in marriages that are on the brink of divorce. So he's really good at writing or creating workshops that teach skills that he would teach those people that were about to get divorced. So they have several main workshops that we do, and I took a couple of those in the beginning, and now I'm a Zoom manager. I volunteer as a Zoom manager to run them. So I've been in probably 30 different workshops, and I get to learn new skills every time just by being a Zoom manager as well. But what we do in the workshops is we learn a skill and then practice that skill with another person in a breakout room. And in the beginning, that person is someone from the same color, the same side, and one person's role-playing to make it easy and so that the conversation doesn't go down the wrong path. Because learning these skills takes time and takes a lot of practice. One workshop's not enough because it's hard. It's hard to change some fairly deep things about how we have conversation.
Janice, I notice in your notes that you actually have a professional background as a marriage counselor before you got involved in the world of physical therapy. Can you say some more about that?
Yeah. Before we moved here, that was my career. I was a marriage counselor in Park City, Utah, and decided I didn't want to do that in such a small place, small town. So I instead worked with my husband in physical therapy. Yeah, and so that was really interesting because I think I thought I would be really good at these skills that we teach in the workshops that Braver Angels teaches. The first workshop I took was called Families in Politics. And I thought, I got this one. I was a family and marriage counselor. And I was terrible. I was terrible. And I think what I came out of that workshop understanding was that I really probably taught my clients and inside myself to avoid those difficult conversations rather than to engage in difficult conversations in a different way. So I have come a long way since starting those workshops with Braver Angels on being able to use the skills that I realized I wasn't using or teaching well before.
Well, that's very interesting because before you said that the technique that you had used was helping people avoid those things, I thought, well, maybe it's because it's different as a professional to be helping other people deal with problems as opposed to, physician heal thyself.
Exactly.
But it sounds like that really wasn't the issue.
Well, I think back then we taught people not to have political conversations because we could, because it wasn't as big a deal. That was 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. So now, if we do that, we have no conversations. I mean, and it's debilitating for our country. So I think now it's so much more important that we learn to be able to bridge the divide, not just to talk about politics, but we bridge the divide with those people that we've placed on the other side about everything. Because one day I had a thought, if I'm one of my neighbors that it was on the other side of the political divide from me, who I wasn't talking with, if I was in the ditch and stuck, he's the one that would pull me out. And I remember thinking, that's more important.
You weren't talking with your neighbors just because you'd grown apart and knew that you had different ideas,
yes.
Or had you actually had some kind of conflict that made you avoid one another?
No conflict. I think we were just avoiding, at least I was avoiding that neighbor.
So can you provide some more examples of what you had been noticing in yourself? And I mean, was this something that was going on for years and you didn't know how to get at it and then finally found Braver Angels? But, you said you noticed polarization within yourself, but maybe you could...
I didn't know that it was happening as much as it was. So the noticing happened more in hindsight, thinking back, oh, yeah, I was losing a lot of sleep, worrying about politics and worrying about our country, worrying about what I thought was bad behavior by people on the other side. So I think what Braver Angels has done for me is heighten that awareness and taught me not to judge another person entirely just because they have a different view from me. I think that would be one of the missions of Braver Angels, is to teach tolerance and kindness, and that everyone comes from a different background. And unless we understand that, we don't really understand the person and their beliefs.
So would it be accurate to say that it was more that through some introspection, you noticed these things going on with you, interfering with your sleep, etc., than that you had overt conflicts with other people?
Right. Although I will say with my father, there were lots of conflicts. Not necessarily about politics, but lots of conflicts. And now, since I've been working with Braver Angels, we just don't have conflict because of the way I approach our conversations. He doesn't get triggered. I'm not triggered. So it's a much more loving conversation and accepting.
And it's changed with your neighbors as well?
Yeah, exactly. And just on the way here this morning, I called up one of my neighbors to check on some plowing stuff, and he said, "You want me to come plow your driveway?"
Oh,
yeah, that's pretty
great.
Cool stuff, isn't it? Yeah.
Hey, I think we're just about out of time for today. I'd really like to thank you, Janice, for all your time and some of the fascinating details about your work with Braver Angels. But is there anything you'd like to mention before we wrap up and then can resume at a next session?
Yeah, I guess it would be helpful for people to know that Braver Angels has local alliances, and those are ways for people to get to know each other in their local area and put on workshops. We have one in Eastern Washington, of which I'm one of the co-chairs. And always at Braver Angels, we are balanced at every level. So all the alliance chairs, there has to be equal reds and blues, and that's the way the organization works at the top as well on all levels. And then if people are interested in finding out more about Braver Angels, the website braverangels.org has lots of stuff. If you sign up for the newsletter a couple times a week, they send out all the current activities that are happening, debates, forums, workshops, book clubs, film discussions, things like that. I know for me that has been very helpful because I have had to immerse myself in learning how to understand how the other side feels in order to not see them as alien. I think it's really easy to stay talking to people only on your own side and reading media only on your own side. So it's important to find opportunities to learn more about the people on the other side. And the Alliance is a good way to do that because we have meetings twice a month and we get together, Reds and Blues, and talk about important topics.
Janice, I'll look forward to learning more about some of these skills and details about Braver Angels in our next discussion. Again, I'd like to thank Janice Dickinson here for talking with us about Braver Angels. This is Marcy Stamper.
Thanks, Marcy, for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about my passion for this organization. Thanks.
Thank you.